Good evening, everyone. How many of you have ever been in a room that looks like this? At least once, I'm sure. It may be the first room that you see when you finish your undergraduate degree. This is a networking event. And if David Attenborough were giving this presentation, he might say something like, "And these are the humans in their 21st century habitat. They call it the networking event." The networking event for me is basically like being in a swimming pool with no deep end, or like listening to the longest joke in history without a punchline. Now, what if I told you that this is the Industrial Revolution equivalent of a networking event? Or that this was the pre-industrial agrarian equivalent of the networking event? Very stimulating. What you're seeing here are the outputs of production for the three great economic transitions in human history. So if you think about it, for most of human civilization, we measured output by what came out of the ground. Bushels of hay, ears of corn, heads of cattle, etc. In 18th century England, and in the centuries to follow in the rest of the world, we measured output mostly by what came out of the factory floor. So we're talking about barrels of widgets, carts of sprockets, piles of cloth, etc. In both of these two periods of economic production, output was measurable, it was tangible, and it was quantifiable. We measured quality by functionality. Humans were mostly the producers, not the output. Most people would agree that the 20th century heralded a third transition into what we call the information revolution, or what is more innocuously put, the knowledge economy. When you think about it, the knowledge economy is actually, at the end of the day, an economy of knowledge. Ideas are the origin of knowledge, and humans are the origin of ideas. So basically, for me, networks are bad news. Networks are bad news because they commodify human relations and they commercialize human relationships. And we're not just talking about commodification of the human. Unfortunately, we've seen that for decades. What we're talking about now is the commodification of human relationships. What you're looking at here is not actually a networking event, it's human herding. The knowledge economy is dehumanizing human relations and commodifying human relationships. We've replaced depth with breadth, and we replaced reciprocal exchanges between ourselves and our community to that between individuals. This is a dilution of the most critical component to what it means for me to be human. When I go to a networking event and somebody hands me a business card, it's like I'm putting my hand through a waterfall. It's dry on the other side. My point tonight, what I'm advocating, is a return to organizations, to traditional organizations that emphasize meaningful connections, that rebuild the village, that rebuild the clubhouse, that rebuild what we held dear for so long, for so many centuries before the knowledge economy. Places like Godwin do this, and also places like this. Now, I've spent many years attending networking events. I've spent many years swimming in shallow pools, but I've also had the privilege of being a member of some pretty amazing communities. And the one that I want to talk to you about tonight is actually my college fraternity, Sigma Chi. I've been a Sigma Chi for almost 15 years, and it continues to add meaning and value and inspiration to my life, despite my having left its formal bounds almost 10 years ago. And so let me tell you what I mean by brotherhood. Let me show you what I mean by meaningful connections. What is different about a meaningful connection versus the kind of connection that you'll have for 2 seconds in a networking event. Most people would agree that their first week at university is an extremely important moment in their life. It's a life-changing moment. For me, my first week at university, the world changed. I didn't know anyone in that tragedy until I went to my first Sigma Chi fraternity event that week. I walked into a room full of brothers that I had never met before, and they were gathered together to remember 13 members of our fraternity whom they had never met, but who were lost earlier that week in this disaster. In that moment, I was united and connected with thousands of other people around the world in grief, love, mourning, and resolve. Brotherhood is not about having connections. Brotherhood is about having a connection with people that you've never met. 10 years later, exactly 10 years later almost, another Sigma Chi died tragically. My friend and brother, Jack Layton, was the leader of my party in Canada, the New Democratic Party, Canada's only social democratic party. In 2011, he fought an election and earned a result that no one believed possible, including myself. He persevered through the election, carrying his cane held high, with deteriorating physical health, and then eventually became the leader of the opposition for the first time in the history of my party. 3 months later, I remember getting a phone call at work, someone telling me, "Matt, I'm sorry, Jack has died." The country was stricken with grief, and I was a pretty broken up person for a very, very long time after that. But I'll never forget the first time that I met Jack. I'll never forget the first time that I put my hand out to him and he gave me our fraternal grip. I knew at that moment that I had an instant bond, not a connection, but an instant bond with this man. As you know, politics is a pretty cutthroat game. You take trust as often as you can find it, but I trusted Jack instantly, and he trusted me because we shared the same obligation. Brotherhood is not about making an instant connection. Brotherhood is about having instant trust. Think about the last time you met someone for the first time and you trusted them instantly. Now, I spent a lot of time at my frat house. Way more time than I spent at the library, I'm sorry to say. It's actually a miracle I'm here doing a PhD, quite frankly. No matter how many times I walked in and out of our common room, I never once thought to look at this photo. Walked past it 1,000 times, never once looked at this photo. It wasn't until I brought my dad to our fraternity chapter, and he was looking at this photo, and he pointed to the guy, the goofy-looking guy, in the middle back row and said, "Oh my God, I think that's Uncle John." I've never met my Uncle John. This photo was taken in 1933, fully 50 years before I was born. But because of our fraternity, I have a connection with him that many people that he met throughout his life never had with him. I'm willing to bet that I know things about him that the vast majority of people in his life didn't know about him. As a result of our connection, as a result of our bond in our brotherhood. Networking events last an evening, but a brotherhood lasts more than a lifetime. It transcends generations. It's not about who shows up at the weddings. It's about who shows up at the funerals. I can't tell you the number of funerals that I've been to for mothers and fathers and for brothers and sisters where fully half the pews were full of Sigma Chi's. Sigma Chi brothers who didn't know the departed, and in many cases who didn't even know the brother, but who turned up anyway. People often say firm handshake, firm handshake, firm handshake, firm handshake. It's not about having a firm handshake. It's about having strong arms around you. Strong arms that stay with you your whole life, that stay with you in your moments of loneliness, in your moments of despair. You can't trade integrity. You can't fund fidelity, and you can't buy trust. But these things come for free in a brotherhood, but with the greatest possible condition, the obligation that you owe to one another. I believe that the knowledge economy is driving us further apart. It's commercializing our relationships. It's creating an economic exchange between individuals when there should be an emotional, a personal, and a meaningful connection. I actually think the knowledge economy and all the technology that the previous video speaker was talking about is driving us further apart than geography ever did in the centuries previous to this. That's a weird thing to think about, but I'm convinced that's a fact. What we need to do is we need to assert, emphasize, and support places like Goodenough and places like my Sigma Chi fraternity that build strong, meaningful bonds between people, bonds that stay with you your whole life, even if you never see that person again. I want to leave you with a very simple quote by philosopher de Tocqueville. When he was asked to describe the British political condition, he said something very simple. He said, "The British are a nation of clubs." I believe that in the interest of democracy, in the interest of community, and in the interest of meaningful connections, that it should be so once again. And the last thing I want to leave you with is the next time you're at a networking event, which I have no doubt that you will be, the first person that you finish talking to, instead of shaking hands, you do what we do in Canada, which is this. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.